Welcome to HJC's weekly Q&A session for the 2015 TIP Call for Projects. Hope you all have been able to log in and can hear me okay. Can I get a confirmation from someone that the audio seems to be working all right? We had a question earlier. Okay, very good. It should be a pretty short session today. Not a whole lot to brief you on today. Unfortunately, I had some unplanned travel out of Houston the end of last week, but we'll get right back on track. And I'll try to cover a couple areas that I think y'all may have some questions. I'm going to ask you a poll question here towards the end of my slides, which are going to be pretty brief. Let's see if this works okay. All right, again, we're just going to cover the remaining Q&A sessions. This was the only session that we knew we needed to move from a Monday. So thank you all. I'm glad you were able to log in and join us today on a Tuesday. The remainder of the sessions should be no conflicts with our normal Monday at 2 p.m. time. Again, so next week on the 10th, and then all the way through at least the 15th, and we'll actually continue these as long as we have an open application period. Little update for you. Again, not much change on the website. We're working hard on the QA/QC part of this. We will have this up and running this week on Thursday. I'm going to contact TxDOT and select a couple other folks to try it out for us tomorrow and just make sure that we've made it as easy to use as possible and see if there are any obvious things we can correct and fix before we make it published out for everybody. And we have lots of things we got to change right at the last minute. Again, as we have each of these webinars held, we do post the recording of them immediately afterwards. So the first two are already posted, and we'll post this one as soon as we're done later today. We are, of course, based on the delay in getting the application up, evaluating the schedule implications. Again, nothing's changed there. When we get closer to the Thanksgiving holiday, we'll have a good idea of how far out to push the application deadline. Did want to make sure that y'all understood what was going to be available. And talking with TxDOT just last week, gave them at least some comfort to know what materials were going to be available for folks to use. So we are going to have templates, obviously, for the areas where we're asking for a kind of standardized response. So the budget, again, there's a differentiation we walked through on our last week on the second session, the major budget table as well as the other budget table. We'll also have a template for the other, or for the operating costs, and TDC applications as well. My apologies, my phone is ringing. Let me look at that. Okay, I can safely ignore that. My apologies if you can hear it too loudly and it's interrupting your ability to hear. We'll also have the benefit cost templates for the delay. That's our standard one we've been using for a number of years. Safety, which again will be keyed off of, or at least have the ability to key off of, the standard kind of TxDOT format for safety crash data. So once you've got that list pared down and you've done your basic analysis, you can pull that crash record information in. Emissions, again, a pretty standard assessment. And we'll also include a generic one that'll basically just do the discounting for you, so you can input the the annual benefit stream. And this is useful for the areas where we don't have a standardized analysis available. So that's the full life cycle cost, or the reduction in operating costs. That supports the state of good repair, reconstruction type projects, as well as the economic development, because there's such a wide variety of things folks could bring to bear there. We'll give you just a basic template that makes sure you're at least doing the same discounting process as everybody else. Again, the current schedule, we'll be looking to reassess how far out to potentially push the application period towards the end of this month, now that we are into Thanksgiving. Again, we still have 6 weeks till the original deadline date, so I think once we get a little closer, we'll have a better idea what difficulties folks may be having with the application, with the analyses, that kind of thing, to know just how long we should push the deadline out. We do recognize there's holidays in there, and we'll take that into account. We're not trying to make this onerous or difficult for people. We want to make sure that everybody has an equal opportunity to participate. Again, not much else to cover with you there. I am going to ask a quick poll question, and that'll lead into, I'm just going to cover some basic guidance, useful links that we'll have in our available to you in the application itself. So let me open up that poll question real quick. All right, I'm hoping that everybody can see that. All right, so again, it's asking you if you understand what type of application is appropriate for your project. And I'm heartened to see a good number of folks think they have a good idea of which application they need. And nobody's saying no, which is even better. So if you do need to say no, that's fine. All right. I think I regret, unfortunately, the software doesn't allow me to just show this to you, but it has about, I think you guys can maybe see the results in the area where you typed, where you clicked your response, but we've got about a little under 2/3 saying they know which type of application they need to use, about 1/3 saying they need some confirmation, and nobody yet has indicated that they have no real good framework or idea of which type of application they need. So that's very heartening. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll since I think we're good on there. Okay, and let's see. All right. Some of the resources that I'd like to at least make sure you're aware of, and again, we'll have some links to these throughout the guidance document and the application, are some materials that TxDOT has available. I hope that the website page is visible to y'all. Can somebody confirm just that it was able to switch from the slides to the web page? Okay, good. All right, this is TxDOT's NEPA and Project Development Toolkit page, and they have a lot of very useful information here. This is what they use to walk through the NEPA process, and it goes from really kind of cradle to grave on the environmental process. Includes links to all of their state administrative code, to the federal regulatory code from the Council on Environmental Quality, a whole bunch of information on the front end of NEPA, how you integrate NEPA within the planning process. So we've talked a lot about this in our committees. How do we include information in the planning process that allows us to just drag those decisions and those analyses right into NEPA and not have to redo any of that product? That's something that we'll hopefully be doing more of over the coming years. But then we get into project scoping and actual production worksheets and checklists for the completion of environmental documentation. Hope most of y'all are kind of familiar with what's out here already, but some of you may not be. But I encourage y'all to check it out. I think if you go to just the main TxDOT webpage, we'll see if their search function works pretty well. We'll just try it out. Yeah, I think if you just try Environmental Toolkit, it should be the very first link. Should get me right back to, oh, it does not, okay, it's the Environmental Compliance Toolkits, which includes a whole bunch of other stuff. In fact, the CIA, the Community Impacts Assessment, is new as well. That's pretty important for a lot of the significant projects to understand how to perform. So that's very useful information. It deals a lot with the indirect and cumulative impacts. It's related to that as well. So if you're not familiar with it, I'd encourage you to check it out. But NEPA and project development is one of those bullets there, and that gets you back to where we were. I'm just going to look at one of these documents just as an example for you, and that's the scoping procedure for CEs that the Environmental Affairs Division put out earlier this year. Again, they updated this in June associated with their assumption of CE approval responsibilities. They put out a series of these manuals and procedures. And I will tell you, this is not about scoping your construction project. It is about scoping your environmental document. I do want to make sure that that's clear. So when we talk about a scoping meeting with TxDOT, yes, you're going to be talking about what project you want to do, but the scoping you're in fact doing, as I click through here, you'll see there are a variety of areas that really walk you through each area that you might need to address in an environmental document, and it walks you through a couple of questions on whether you need to include an analysis or not. So it's really helping you construct the scope that you would use to hand off to a consultant, or perhaps do internally if you have some folks on board that can do that, to know exactly what steps they need to do to have a complete environmental document to support the clearance of your project. So again, it really talks about a threshold for each program area, and there are basic questions about whether, for air quality, are we located in a non-attainment area, and does the project add capacity, or is it on a new location? We, of course, answer no to the first question on most cases, or it's otherwise exempt from conformity. Sometimes we can say yes. And then if we fail that, we go into sorry, it's scrolling around a little bit. My mouse is going a little wild. Into the threshold, and then it just tells you what you need to make sure is in the document if your answer is no, and then it tells you what you need to complete if your answer is yes. So it does this for a variety of areas: archaeology, biology, and of course that's one to note. In this state, there is no exception on biology. You have to complete the biological impact evaluation. So make sure that one's on your radar screen. There's the CIA that I was talking about. Hazardous materials, historical, noise is an important one. Of course, it's got the longest list of tasks to complete if you need to perform the analysis. The planning checklist, public involvement, water resources, and 4F. So that's the basic checklist for CEs, but it really helps you walk through the process. And this is the kind of document that when you sit down with TxDOT, if you've not done it before, you really go through and kind of work out this entire document to make sure everybody understands what's going to be required, and almost critically important, who's going to do it. Are there some things, maybe you're on a TxDOT facility, that TxDOT can do, or are there tasks that the local government will do, the consultant will do? All of that is identified. Okay, so that's just one of the documents that's available to you. It sometimes helps folks understand what's going to be required to develop their project. And I actually think I do have a couple other slides real quick. Okay, where did it go? Ah, there we go. Q&A. Sorry, it was past the contact information. So again, were there any questions about type of application? Looks like we're actually doing pretty well there. Again, the two key questions related to that are: does conformity apply to your project, and where and what type of environmental document is necessary? If for any reason you do not qualify for a CE, then the major investment process would apply. And that, just as a note, does apply to projects that would be eligible, but there's some substantial controversy about the project. That is one of those things that is very clear, that you're no longer eligible for a CE if you have like a very significant noise issue or significant drainage controversy. Again, it's the controversy aspect, not that there's a potential impact, but there's controversy about it that can drag you out of being a CE. And then type of benefit analyses, and again, mention of that is tied to need and purpose. So now I'm coming back to why I actually had this slide up here. Again, TxDOT in their environmental manual, again, if you search on their website for environmental manual, it'll, I think, is your first hit. And under the environmental documentation section, they have this prepare, purpose, and needs statement that really walks through some very helpful suggestions on what to be considering when you prepare the need and purpose statements. I will tell you, brevity can sometimes be very beneficial. We're really looking for the primary drivers for the project, not every last possible benefit of the project. Particularly when we're talking about our other investments, we really want you to zero in on the primary reason, the singular reason that the project is being moved forward. And so typically that's going to be, I have a significant delay issue, I have a significant safety issue, or I have a potential economic development issue, something like that, that I need to address and I need to perform this project for. And you can really focus on that one aspect. You don't need to give us a whole lot of additional information on a bunch of different areas. We're trying to focus in the analysis and your application on the one area. The other resource that we'll be linking you to is AASHTO's Practitioner's Handbook for developing purpose and need, and it also has some information on developing alternatives for transportation projects. We'll say this handbook is mostly focused on EIS level projects. However, the section on need and purpose is down here. I think the chapters are numbered. It's 2 and 3. Determining needs is chapter 2, and it really emphasizes you need to have the right kind of data to understand what the problem is, and some guidance on defining the no action condition, which isn't that nothing happens, but that the particular project does not occur. So understanding what implication is of the no build scenario is important. It talks about the forecast year. Again, most of this guidance is talking about EIS level projects. So the timing of that is not as important for some of the smaller projects. Different particular pieces of information on congestion, land use and development, safety, that kind of thing. So it has some very useful information on how do you use that information to develop the need statement, as well as the defining the project purpose. Again, so it's really talking about a clear statement of the project's purpose. Again, we are going to have a character limit on that section, much larger for the major investments, about half the size for the other investments, trying to make sure folks zero in on the key aspect, the primary purpose of the project, which they do talk about here, this primary versus secondary purposes. Okay, and then they also have some guidance on safety and economic development as the primary purposes and what really that means for a project. I think that was all the links that I really wanted to cover with y'all, and I said it was going to be a brief session today, and yet we'll provide the links to you. In fact, you'll be able to read them, I think, in the video of the webinar, but we'll make sure that you have the links to those resources available. And with that, I don't have anything else to really share with y'all today. If anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and either type them in the box, or as always, nobody has opted to do this yet. Raise your hand or indicate that you'd like to ask a question, and I can unmute you. All right, we have a couple of hands raised, so I'll start there. Actually, we have one question here that's typed in. Let me see if this actually... Can you all see that when I drag that over? Is it possible to see that? Nope. Okay. All right. Then it must be clipping that out. The question is, are gateway markers and placemaking components eligible for funding? The gateway markers are planned to be placed within existing medians within the right-of-way, assuming TxDOT project. I guess I'll differentiate maybe a little bit there between the gateway markers and what might be placemaking components. And again, there's a distinction here between eligible and components that are going to drive up the cost and potentially make it difficult for the project to compete. I would generally respond with saying, and I'm assuming this is a pedestrian bicycle type project or a roadway reconstruction project or something like that. Cost elements related to the transportation infrastructure itself and anything that's required that's associated with that, so drainage or something like that, that's really addressing the actual project that's being the roadway or the pedestrian realm that's being constructed. That's really the focus of our funding. When we see elements that are largely aesthetic, number one, it drives the cost of the project up compared to the benefits that get assigned to it, so it makes it more difficult to compete. And I'd also say that just politically, it makes it a little more difficult for the project to advance through our process. There are some pretty strong feelings about how federal funds should be used on our policy council, and aesthetic items don't generally rate real high on their list. So that's just not telling you it's ineligible, just that caution would probably be the best thing I can do for you. Discretion may be the better part of valor there. So I'm not sure if that really answers your question other than says be careful. Let's see, we've got two people with their hands raised. I'll unmute Pat. I'm hoping you're ready to ask your question. All right, Pat, are you there? Okay, doesn't look like that's working. So I guess, Pat, I'll let you type your question in, and I'll see if Yvonne's will work. All right, so Yvonne, are you there? And can you, let's see if we can hear you. Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. So for a transit project, specifically one that's just procuring vehicles, the question that's under economic development related to whether or not the project meets the minimum recommended activity density threshold, is that applicable? I mean, would we have to submit basically a shapefile of all of the fixed bus routes that the buses would be running on to do that analysis, or how does that work?
Right. Well, I think it's an interesting question. Part of that's related to what type of transit service we're talking about. If we're talking about fixed route within a jurisdiction, then that might be a little easier to answer. If we're talking about vehicles for a new park and ride service, is that what we're talking about?
No, actually, these would be fixed route buses.
Okay. Well, then it would probably be the primary jurisdiction, and the kind of, we'd want to know, the shapefile is exactly what you're talking about. So again, that's an area that I think we indicated we would be able to provide some assistance in answering that question if we get the description of the project and the location information. So you're exactly right. The shapefile, the GIS files would be what we would use to do that analysis.
Okay, so it's a shapefile of the entire routes.
Right. Yeah. The only other thing I'd note for you is vehicle acquisitions. We're going to definitely prefer that we utilize existing programs to supply those where possible. So again, we have like the fleet expansion program available to us. That would be the preferred mechanism to fund those types of projects versus a one-off kind of application. So if you have any questions on particular circumstance, please go ahead and send us a quick note on what the project is so we can get some idea on whether that's a possibility or not. Okay.
Could I ask one more question?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. There's also a question that says, will the project improve or significantly affect infrastructure owned or operated by another agency? I assume by another agency you mean other than the sponsor of the application.
That is correct. So in the case of a transit project, let's say Gulf Coast is going to operate a service that affects both, let's say, Dickinson, League City, and Webster. We'd want to see if all three of those entities had something to say about the project. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yep. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks, Yvonne. All right. I have a question on what is an acceptable range for major projects based on what has previously been awarded. I'm assuming that's a cost question, the dollar value that might be acceptable. And unfortunately, I don't think I can give you a great idea there. We've funded some pretty significant investments on the TxDOT side, 60, 70, 80 plus $million. Through this process, we committed $62 million to the Uptown corridor, the Post Oak corridor, in the last call for projects. So some pretty significant projects can move forward through this process. And the other thing I would say is because we're including Proposition 1 funds as our first crack at trying to get a priority list in place for how we're going to use these funds over time, set up the major projects. You'll see some major TxDOT corridors come through this process. I would expect, 45 South and things like that will likely be in the list as applying for funding through this call. I'm not sure, Lisa, if that answers your question or not on the acceptable range. Then they have a question that's really related to the CMAQ eligibility of a project. Again, we're trying not to have folks determine what type of funding that they want to seek. We're trying to find the best projects in these different project types, and then we work with TxDOT to assign the most appropriate or most available source of funds that the project is eligible for. So just as an example, in the past we have combined the use of CMAQ and other sources on a project where it was clear some of it would be eligible and some of it might not be eligible. Or in the case of something that we knew there was some question about its eligibility, we've used surface transportation funds or something like that just because we knew it wouldn't have a question about eligibility. So for the most part, we're not asking folks to know what type of funding they want. Just give us the best projects that they can under these different areas, and then we'll find the resources to best advance them. In particular, I guess it's a question about a roundabout on a local road and a major activity center. Since we're talking about a local road, it would not be eligible potentially for surface transportation program funds. I think we'd have to dig into the eligibility question on CMAQ, but we may have some other resources that could be applied. So I think we'd want to see the application, see how it scores through our process, and then if it looks like it's meritorious enough to be recommended for funding, we'd identify which resources should advance it. All right, and then there's a follow-up question about who's responsible for the cost-benefit analysis. I will say this in general. The applicants are responsible for submitting a complete application, including benefit cost information. We are available to provide assistance with certain analyses that feed into that. So for delay and for safety, we can hopefully make it pretty easy for applicants to complete that requirement. But besides the pedestrian bicycle, where we kind of own the analysis for that, and the ITS projects where we also manage the model that we'll use for that, it's really incumbent on folks to get us something early. Again, we've asked for the preliminary stuff to be sent in towards the end of this month by Thanksgiving. I think the 24th is the date that we had established to request assistance from HGAC. And then we can make sure that our modeling folks or our computer environmental folks are keyed up to support those applications. So I'm not sure if that directly answer your question, but the applicants are responsible. And again, for state of good repair, where we're talking about operating cost or maintenance costs, the differential, we don't have a lot of that historical data, and it's going to depend pretty significantly on the jurisdiction and what their experience is. So unfortunately, that's not a strong area where we'll be able to, we don't have a model or something like that we can alter and give you output from to help evaluate that. And then the templates, yes, will be posted by the 6th as well. In fact, they should be posted, those should be up tomorrow. We're going to, again, work with select couple of sponsors to see if they can break our application before we send it out to everybody else. All right, I'm going to step away just for a moment, but if anybody has any other questions, please type them in or raise your hand on the little interface. All right, sorry about that. My phone was ringing nonstop. Are there any other questions? I guess, Yvonne, your hand is still raised. Just want to make sure, see if you, I guess I'll unmute you, just see if you have another question. No. No worries. Thanks. All right. Well, again, not seeing any other questions. Feel free to send us emails if you have any other questions. Again, the best way to contact us is through the general tip address. That makes sure, in the event that even if I'm not here and available, somebody else can probably give you an answer. Or you can directly send it to me or to Catherine McCride at TxDOT, particularly things that relate to a TxDOT decision. Okay, Lisa's asked a question of how we're going to send out links. Again, first I'd say the fastest way is we're going to have this video uploaded pretty quickly, so you'll be able to grab them right off of there. Just watch the video and type them in, but we'll have them in the documents that get posted tomorrow. So, okay. All right. Well, again, thank you all very much for dialing in today. Sorry about having to reschedule it from Monday. We'll be back again next Monday at 2 p.m. For the 4th weekly Q&A session. Thank you very much.